President Tinubu meets Kagame in Kigali for bilateral talks ahead of Africa CEO Summit.
Federal government sets June 17, 2026 for Nigeria's digital switch over launch.
This is going to bring a lot of advantages to all the broadcasters, the viewers, and everybody, the advertisers.
And court jails ex-power minister Saleh Maman for 80 years over 33 billion naira fraud.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we examine the just concluded Africa-France Summit in Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, so we know that for decades, relationship between Africa and France has been shaped by history, politics, security, and of course, economic interest. But in recent years, that relationship has, come under increasingly scrutiny.
From questions around military presence to trade, investment, and political influence, many African countries are now asking what a modern partnership with France should really look like.
Very, very, very fundamental question there, Victor. So let's zero it in on the present France-Africa Summit. Now, that started in 1973. Originally, it was designed as a platform for, engagement between France and its former African colonies.
And over time, it grew into a broader forum, expanding beyond diplomatic ties to include investment, security, development, technology, and of course, youth engagement.
So this year's summit, held in Nairobi, Kenya, is particularly significant, and here is why. For the first time, the meeting was hosted in an Anglophone East African country. Now that's a shift many see as symbolic of a changing African landscape.
The summit brought together about 30 African heads of state and government, alongside business leaders, investors, and international development partners.
Indeed, and the message from many of those African leaders, who attended the summit was that the continent wants partnerships built less on dependence, but more on mutual benefit, investment, and respect.
There were also strong conversations around trade and economic integration, particularly the African Continental Free Trade Area, the FCTA, and how many countries like Nigeria can maximize its potential.
So the summit closed with major investment commitments and a declaration that is focused on what participants described as a partnership of sovereign equals.
So, what does this mean for Africa's economic future? Is France truly resetting its relationship with the continent? And how should African countries position themselves in this evolving global order?
Victor, it's like asking what the present U.S. president's visit to China holds. I mean, that's another significant development.
An ongoing visit that will impact the world itself, global trade, because decisions from the world, the two world powers in terms of trade, the biggest economies in the world, will have something to say different countries of the world.
That's, of course, if both agree, come to a mutual agreement on issues like, for instance, security. I mean, both countries differ, over certain security issues around the world now.
There are always touchy issues. For China, the issue of Taiwan is a big deal.
Precisely.
The war in Iran will also concern China, being the biggest patrons of the Iranian oil. And but
Russia,
so
Ukraine
far,
as well.
Yeah, but so far they have paid themselves compliment. Trump has said she is a great leader, and the feeling is mutual
anyway,
until they get behind closed doors.
We'll continue with that when we come to the newspaper review, but this will be our focus. I mean, Africa-France summit that just ended will be our focus this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. I'm Claire Adelabo Abdurazak.
And I'm Victor Azu. Thank you for joining us on the program. We are live on the network service of the NTA. The newspaper review, of course, will always come your way, and not too long from now.
From the pre-colonial era to the present day, France has maintained deep political, economic, and cultural ties with many African nations, particularly French-speaking countries across the continent. Over the years, however, international relations experts have continued to question the nature of these relationships, arguing that they have largely revolved around dependency, unequal economic structures, and the extraction of African vast natural resources, rather than balanced and mutual beneficial partnerships. For many African countries, the outcome has been persistent economic hardship, raising debt burdens, and slow-paced development, despite the continent's enormous human and mineral potential.
We must confront with honesty and urgency.
But a new conversation is gradually emerging across the continent as African leaders increasingly advocate stronger regional cooperation, strategic investments, and partnerships built on equity, innovations, and shared prosperity. This renewed position resonated strongly at the just concluded Africa-France summit held in Nairobi, Kenya, where leaders from the Anglophone and Francophone African countries engaged France on a new vision for cooperation.
The era in which Africa's development was principally framed through aid, dependency, and unsustainable borrowing must give way to a new paradigm grounded in investment, innovation, domestic resource mobilization, and strategic partnerships.
The summit provided a platform for discussions centered on partnership, innovation, industrial growth, and investment, pushing for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as a smooth platform. French President Emmanuel Macron appears to align with the shifting narrative, repeatedly emphasizing the principle of co-investment and equal partnership. President Macron also announced investment commitment valued at about $27 billion targeted at critical sectors including energy transition, digital technology, artificial intelligence, the maritime economy, and agriculture.
Getting Africa forward on the economic level means greater sovereignty and autonomy. It's important for Europeans as well.
There was also growing consensus among participants that Africa must play a more active role in shaping the emerging global order, rather than remaining on the margin of international decision-making. Calls for greater African representation at the United Nations Security Council equally resurfaced at the summit. Despite these commitments, analysts insist that African countries must first strengthen internal cooperation to confront pressing challenges such as insecurity in the Sahel region, economic dependency, political instability, and intensifying geopolitical competitions. How can this summit help forge a new direction for Africa's development aspiration? And what opportunities can a renewed partnership with France provide in advancing sustainable growth, security, and economic transformation across the continent? These and other related issues will form the focus of discussion with today's guests on Good Morning Nigeria.
Absolutely, Joseph Oteng, thank you for putting that together for us. So just before we introduce our guests in the studio, just to remind you that you can also be part of this production, part of our conversation. Send us your messages via the WhatsApp number that will be displayed on your screen. It's already there. You can also follow us on Facebook. Of course, join us on YouTube. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So let me start my introduction with the man who comes with, many blessings from God, as his name would imply. Professor Chigozie Enwerem, and he's a professor of international relations and strategic studies. We're very glad to have you with us, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
All right. And we also have with us Professor Mukhtar Imam, and he's a professor of international relations, diplomacy, and directing staff of National Institute for Security Studies. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining us.
My pleasure.
We have also been joined to this program by Dr. Niyi Akinshiju, Chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiatives. He's also a finance and investment analyst. We appreciate your presence.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Because this conversation is built around Investment Summit, I'd like to start my conversation with the analyst himself, the guru analyst, of course, and our own in-house financial analyst, Dr. Niyi Akinshiju. And I want to start from the basics, because if we look at all the economic, indices, the economic statistics between Kenya and Nigeria with France, all round, Nigeria seems to enjoy major economic advantage in terms of relationship with France, whether it's FDI, whether it's the number of companies operating and all that. So the question would be, in the first place, what are investors considering in citing such an investment summit?
Thanks very much for that question. It's just recently, that the African continent had also become a hub, of investment discussions. Given the historical relationships between the whole colonial masters and the colonies, as it were, it had always been about handouts. It had always been about support, about aids and all that. I think there's a new orientation, there's a new direction, as it were, on how the form of engagement will be more productive, will be more economically engaging. And that is why we are having this Africa Forward Summit in Africa, in Kenya. The major determinant of investments before now was what would the investing country, jurisdiction, gain more than what it can give, to where it is investing. And so therefore there had been that imbalance where the investor determines even what is going to invest, determine the price, for which is engaging that jurisdiction. So I think over time there's this change. That change now is also being led by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Just before you even venture into that, I'm sorry to interrupt, because the question was to be, because that's the question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah.
If Nigeria has this major advantage, in terms of trade, investment and all that with France over Kenya, why was Kenya a better, place, a better country to hold? Yes.
I don't think it's about the quantum, of engagement. It could be about the location. It could be about the place of Kenya, in diplomacy in Africa, as it were. I think there was one summit in South Africa.
I think it moves around.
Yeah, it moves around. So it's not determined by the quantum of engagement. The important thing is the willingness of a jurisdiction, to host. That is one. And of course, the strategic interest of that jurisdiction, as it were. You can see President Ruto making some advocacy around the African economy and all that. So it's not determined by that. Well, for me, what is essential is the theme of the summit. We are seeing the theme that is different from what it used to be now. We are talking about an emerging reformed economic environment in Africa. You know, we are seeing a new organic economic growth, you know, in countries in Africa. And what interests me, for instance, was seeing people like Aigiko Imokwede, seeing Dangote, seeing Rabiu, you know, on seats at the table in those places. Now, what it's telling you is that Nigeria, as a country, is no longer just the dependent economy. This is a country that has footprints, economically speaking, across the African continent too. That's the kind of thing I want to see, you know. And so therefore, if we are talking, we actually have actors, Nigerian actors, that can sit at the table anywhere on the African continent and talk authoritatively about economic and development.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Odiakishiju, for your opening remarks. Now let me get to Professor Imam. You know, Africa has long talked about resetting its relationship with global powers. You know that you recall that recently also the French influence in Africa waned a bit when Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, you know, practically chased, you know, French military out of its territories. And I'm wondering, is this Nairobi summit the shift in terms of Africa resetting that relationship with global powers, or is it the French trying to get one leg back in to Africa?
Thank you very much for the question. All of your postulations are correct. There are geopolitical shifts happening around the world. Alliances are changing. Goalposts are shifting. We're seeing the rise of emerging and contending world powers across the world. Countries within specific regions of the world are beginning to say enough of the neo-colonial posturing. We want to determine our own future, and so on and so forth. So as a result of the shift in the dynamics of geopolitics, we are witnessing an era where the erstwhile colonies of France are beginning to say, we want to determine our own future, we want to take our future into our hands. And so therefore, that has led to the consequences which you alluded to. It wasn't a bit of chasing them away, it was absolute. It was a way of saying, look, we leave completely. And of course, when you trace this back to the historical relationship between France and its erstwhile colonies, it was apparent that France, through its policy of assimilation, was one of the fiercest as far as colonial relations was concerned. The policy of assimilation was dreadful, to say the least. But of course, these are all part of what has shaped history. And of course, into the neo-colonial period, France continued to maintain significant dominance politically, economically, and even militarily over its erstwhile colonies through what is termed the policy of the Franc-Afrique. Significant quantum of electricity, for example, was being subsidized by Nigerian uranium in France. And so all of that essentially led to a very bittersweet relationship between France and its erstwhile colonies. So what France is trying to do is essentially repackage that relationship to ensure that it has a new footing into the African continent. It's not just France, it's virtually all global powers. We're witnessing a new scramble for Africa, what we in the classroom call the new scramble for Africa 2.0. And so virtually all global powers, including emerging and contending global powers. Qatar has hosted Africa. We were hosted in Sochi in Russia. China is doing the same using FOCAC. As we speak, in the next coming days, we're going to be having the Indian-African Summit, and so on and so forth. So you see a lot of powers trying to make inroads into the African continent. And France obviously doesn't want to get left behind. But these are all part of the perspectives that we have witnessed from history up to where we are today. The reality is no country can live in isolation. None can claim to be self-sufficient. And so therefore, there will always be that interaction between and among countries within the international system. And this is what we call the diplomatic bargaining. There will always be bargaining. However, what is most prominent in all of this is what are you bringing to the bargaining table? It is your bargaining chip that gives you an edge because you must bargain, but you're either bargaining from a position of strength, a position of weakness, or in no position at all. So what we are urging African leaders to begin to do is to ensure that when you come to the table to negotiate, you negotiate from a position where you're meeting that leader, regardless of what part of the world he comes from, as a king meeting a king.
As two sovereigns.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you, Prof. Let's come back to Professor Chigozie again. This is a diplomatic, bargaining. Nigeria and France, been long friends in terms of diplomatic relations, but that relation is being, expanded now to include other areas like security, energy, and all that. But first of all, let's even look back and see how we have fared in terms of, our relationship, diplomatic relations.
Now, you see one thing about, let me just focus purely on this France-African partnership that is going on in Nairobi, which is titled African Forward Summit. And when you look at the word summit, you tend to understand the diplomatic relevance of that summit. Because when you talk about summit, it's a gathering of presidents of nations, negotiators, and businessmen to achieve strategic interests. And that emphasizes that what kind of strategic interests are they going to achieve? So when you look at the framework of that summit, they say it's for mutual beneficial, it's many mutual beneficial outcome. And what are these outcomes? Number one is that the French-African partnership should be free from neocolonialism. The question is it actually free from neocolonialism and colonial sentiments? The second one is a move away from the model of export of raw materials and the issue of dependency. And one strategic thing there is that it is based on strategic economic ties. That is what this Summit Africa is, strategic economic ties. And when you look at the word strategic, you see that the focus of this is on innovation and growth. And when you interrogate, because in diplomacy, you need to interrogate every phrase and every word to understand the strategic motive of the partners. And you see that in this negotiation, in this summit that is going on, France is coming as a country with its national interests. African nations are coming together as one bloc. But the issue, do they have a holistic interest to achieve? So you see that African nations are coming there individually on their own on the issue of innovation and on the issue of growth. Now, let us look at the investment framework on the issue of innovation. What does it actually entail? It entails energy transition, not energy generation, not energy transformation, energy transition. Transition from traditional energy sources to that of green energy. And you see that any partner that is coming for this summit has its own interest striked out. And France, by January next year, 2027, they will exit from the use of coal. And France is the second largest producer of green energy in Europe. And you see that they are coming to penetrate the African market, to sell their own green energy to Africans, and saying that Africans should no longer rely on coal. But when you look strategically on this conventional energy, look at China. China produces over 51% of world coal, and they generate over 50% of their energy from coal. Then Poland, India, also generate over 55% of their energy from coal. But the issue is that they are encouraging Africa and putting pressure on Africa to transit from that traditional energy sources to green energy, which France has comparative advantage. And you see that the essence is to penetrate African markets. And that is why in this the summit that is going on, France...
I think it's ended already.
Yeah, it has ended.
Yeah.
So you see that France talked about giving 23 billion euro investment. And you see that out of that 23 billion euros, 14 billion will come from France entities, while 9 billion will come from African entities. And when you interrogate it deeply, what is Africa going to benefit from this? You see that France is only investing 14 billion euros. And when you break it down to 53 countries in Africa, over a period of years, what is Africa going to benefit? Each of the countries in Africa will only get 259 million. And what is it in the area of investment?
That's assuming that it is equally split, because the opportunities are not the same.
So you see that it's going to be 256 million euros for each of the African countries if it is shared equally. And you know that in diplomacy, it cannot be shared equally.
Precisely.
And also, when you look at it, let us say the cumulative average, which is 23 billion euros. If African countries share it equally, it's just a meager sum of 500 million.
Prof, you know, that's
so what will it do in the area of investment to African nations?
You know, Prof, you've just actually taken us into the nitty-gritty of our conversation, but that's fine, because I wanted to lay, you know, some foundational, you know, platforms, you know, for our viewers to understand our conversation. And indeed, the issue that you have raised, you have broken it up very, you know, clearly. And that's why I'd just like to ask, if some people are wondering, again, given the what African countries stand to gain, if you look at the countries that, you know, attended, I think Nigeria is probably France's largest, you know, trading partner. Even Kenya itself is one of the smallest, although Dr. Akinsuju believes there are other, you know, indicators that may have. But is France being strategic now to reinvent its assimilation policy?
Now, you see one thing about the new phase of capitalism in the world today. The new phase of capitalism is driven by AI, that is rare earth elements. And you see that each of the great powers are now trying to control or secure control of these rare elements. And that is why France has strategically moved from West Africa to Southern and Eastern Africa. Because you see that in the area of rare earth minerals is located in Democratic Republic of Congo and in South Africa. And Kenya offers a sort of entry point for France, because Kenya has been able to show that they have embraced Western values and Western culture in the area of investment. Now, let us look at it critically. You see that their investment in Kenya as out of April this year, 2026, is in the area of maritime economy, particularly in the coastal city of Mombasa. And that coastal city of Mombasa, what is the strategic relevance? It has increased. For the Kenyans, they have benefited by trying to invest in their seaports.
Yes.
But for French also, they are benefiting more than the Kenyan government. Why? Because when you look at that Mombasa, and because it is a link to the Western Indian Ocean, which is a link between Africa and Asia. So, and the trade volume that goes on in that route is over 20 billion. So if France can strategically locate itself in Mombasa and try to put its military forces, troops in Mombasa, over 800 that have signed to be in Mombasa, you see that they are strategically controlling African trade between Africa and Asia to their own strategic benefit. That is why one of the main objectives of this summit is strategic economic ties. And each of the countries are trying to achieve strategic tie. Like, for instance, look at the investment in Kenya. They have benefited in terms of investment. As of 2013, French investment in Kenya was about 40 companies. But as at last year and this year, they have increased to 140 French companies in Kenya. But look at it strategically. Kenya has benefited in terms of influence in Africa, economic influence in Africa. But France is also benefiting in terms of its strategic economic outcome. Now, France has access to Kenyan market, but Kenya do not have access to French market. And also, in that strategic economic engagement, France citizens have visa-free entry into Kenya. But on the other hand, Kenyans do not enjoy the same privilege. So you see that diplomacy is all about strategic calculation and strategic outcome.
And that's why African countries should, come. Of course, many of the leaders talked about coming as equals, not colonialism or anything that looks like it, but coming as countries. Beyond Dr. Akinshiju, if we look at, he's talked about the figures. Billions of euros, which, well, he's alluded to the fact that they are not quite significant. But what should African countries be looking at beyond banding the figures around?
The first thing is to look inward organically by individual countries. The continent of Europe that we celebrate so much today were first individual countries before they identified as a continent. So you had Europe. I mean, you had France. Being organically a strong economy by itself. You had Germany. You had Netherlands, and you have all those. They are stand-alone, strong, economically, oriented jurisdictions as they were. So for African countries, we need to start counting how many numbers of African countries are individually strong, either in terms of their GDP, in terms of security, in terms of standard of living, number of poor, and all those indicators. It is a collection of these countries that determine how strong the continent will be. It cannot just be about the continent first, And my advocacy had always been about the fact that the outside world first see you and respect you based on what you are inside, based on how flourishing your economy is. Your per capita GDP, for instance, was the standard of living of your citizens and others. Those are the indicators that would determine the quality of relationship between you, and other countries, especially the so-called superpower, what I call the metropolitan capitals. So for Africa, the first thing is to drive our own economic growth. And now we have a hub in the African Continental Free Trade Zone, and I believe that if we are able to focus on that, it will drive internal trade and economic growth, and in such a way that it will get to a point in time, the more than 50, the collective of the African continent, when we are able to have so many individual countries, come of age, in terms of economic capacity and all that, the collective of the African continent will be able to engage as partners in the real sense of it. I appreciate the advocacy ongoing now, especially as led by President Tinubu, who first made that declaration, I think sometimes in the 2023 UN General Assembly speech, to say that now the African continent would look out for partnership, and not just for dependent or dependency relationship. And that is where the definition should actually start from. So that if you are bringing in something to the African continent, you are bringing it on the basis of equality and, of course, appropriate equity.
Let's zero in on Nigeria. What does Nigeria stand to gain in all of this? Of course, using the instrumentality of the Nigeria-France Business Council.
The council, I also just understood that as a result of that meeting, Macron has also made a commitment to visit Nigeria sometimes in October, which is good for us. Diplomacy is always positive. It depends on what the engaging country is taken to the table. And for Nigeria, I think we are seeing, indications of a country that could have basis for engagement. However you see Nigeria from outside the world now, you see Nigeria as a multinational. We have multinational companies in Nigeria now. Indigenous multinational companies. Dangote Cement in Togo, Dangote Cement in Tanzania, and you have Ethiopia and all that. You have Nigerian bank franchises across Africa, and you have so many other not so mentioned names also operating in countries of Africa. Now, so when you have that kind of conglomeration of companies that are domiciled in a jurisdiction, in our own case now in Nigeria, the way the world starts saying Nigeria will be different from a country that is perhaps deemed to be economically weak. And in this engagement, for us, it is also networking, not just for the global power that is driving it, but also for the locals. For instance, I believe that with the engagement in Kenya, there will be some new forms of agreements amongst local players in Kenya. And the president that from there gone to Kigali, within African CEOs, the CEO Summit. So for us, it is about selling the Nigerian brand now, because we actually have things to sell. That's the difference. And that is my advocacy. If you don't have things to sell, you may not actually have any need to be in those summits.
That's fine. And one of the things that we've been selling to France, Professor Mutar, is in the area of oil and gas. And of course, we know that we have, I don't know the number now, but certainly we have quite a number of, companies operating in Nigeria, within that sphere. And, as an international relations student, you do know that the Arabics believe that when nations gather on the international system, they gather on the basis to negotiate on the basis of their national interests in diverse areas, security and all that. So how can, the summit has ended. How can Nigeria, strategically, because Prof talked about strategic, how can Nigeria strategically leverage that summit now to translate, its trade relations beyond oil and gas, what we have now?
Well, you see, where leaders sit to discuss and talk about bilateral relations or multilateral relations, as the case may be, and figures are churned out, these figures don't necessarily translate or imply to mean that the monies is what you're going to get in the form of cash. Priorities are set, sectors to be invested in are looked at and given consideration. Countries that have comparative advantage in areas of interest would naturally take the lead as far as the flow of investment is concerned. So to answer your question directly, Nigeria is a country blessed with resources, human and mineral. We are a people who are intellectually prosperous. Nigeria has been exporting intellect, if you will, to other parts of the world. In the last decade, we have been at the top of the food chain in that respect. All we need to do is ensure that we prioritize sectorial, growth, and ensure that investments that are coming in are looking at those portfolios and seeing that these areas are actually solid enough to be able to absorb the investment that is coming in. Reality is, no investor is Father Christmas. For every investor, whether a state or non-state actor that is coming into a certain jurisdiction, is looking out for certain things. What is the market like? What is the ROI going to look like? How will my investment be secure? These are some of the things that are going to be given consideration out of the 14 or whatever billion euro that France is looking to invest in the African continent. So it is our ability to ensure that we have a hub that will accommodate the investment that is coming in whatever form, portfolio investment, real sector investment, whatever that is coming in, as long as you have the hubs in place, the sectorial readiness to be able to absorb them, then of course you're good for business. And these are some of the things we need to begin to give consideration to. Now, we all understand that no investor is going to come into a place where power is epileptic, for example. These are some of the services that government needs to ensure are in place, infrastructure, if you like, that government must ensure are in place to show investors that you have the readiness to take in the investment that is coming in. Of course, security is another area for consideration. However, the summit focuses on specific areas. It looks at trade, it looks again at fintech, it looks at everything around that ecosystem. It looks at the blue economy. So what exactly do we have in place within the Nigerian state to ensure that we tell the world that we're ready for investment in that sector? Because until and unless you have the environment to be able to accommodate the investment that is coming in, nobody's going to invest in you. And therefore, you find that a chunk of that money that may be coming in, because it's on the basis of May, when you hear these figures get churned out, it is just, you know, like a budgetary provision where it's not cast in stone. It is not certain that that amount of money is going to come in. And it is not money that is set aside that is just going to be thrown into the Nigerian or the African market. It is money that will come in incrementally. It is going to come in trenches. This is how it works. And so therefore, we must position ourselves to tell the world that we are in a place where whatever investment is coming into the country, not just in oil and gas, we're ready to take them. We're doing so well in the solid mineral sector, for example, now. We're doing so well in fintech, for example, now. We're doing so well in the blue economy as well, you know. So these are all things that we need to, a gamut of all of them would have to be made available and ready for investment to come in. So that as soon as the investment comes in, it finds a place to set.
But before the investment will come in,
right,
the investors would also consider, you know, the environment.
Absolutely.
Against some of the parameters that you have, you know, just mentioned. And one of those parameters is infrastructure. Right now, you know, our rail system is not, you know, is still developing. We are still battling with electricity stability and all of that. So how can Nigeria now strategically position itself to be able to leverage some of the, whether it's on an equal basis, as Victor, you know, earlier indicated, or even, you know, benefit from the chunk of that promised financial, you know, assistance?
I think we need to look at this African Forward Summit, particularly the area that concerns Nigeria, yes, which is African France Business Council. And when you look at that aspect, as at 2025, the total investment of France in Nigeria is about 4.7 billion. And when you look at that total investment, in what areas? And that is why the president made a comment that he wants to see this investment reflect in the areas of job creation, in the areas of economic benefits and industries. He emphasized the word industries. But you see that the emphasis of the president is on industry and economic benefits. But when you look at the summit generally, you see that generally the general objective of the summit is on 3 areas, which is, one is on the area of agriculture, energy transition, and the areas of digitalization, that is AI-driven economy. And that is general objective of the summit. But when you look at the specific objective of the summit, which was drafted to guide this summit, it was in the area of, one, in the area of...
I think it's in the area of job creation.
Job creation.
Industrial growth.
Job creation in the area of creative industry, culture, in the areas of creative industry and culture. And the area, in these 2 areas now, what does Africa tend to benefit? It's 3 areas: sports, culture, and creative industry. And when you look at it strategically, you see that they will reflect the interests of France. And that is why in that forum, Nigeria was able to sign a deal in the area of creative industry, that is in hotel. And when you look at it, is it what Africans actually need? Is it what Nigeria actually needs? And that's why the presidency must reflect in economic policy and industrialization. What Africa needs at this period is industrialization. And that is why you see that in diplomacy, there are symbolic representation. The focus is on sports. And you see that in that summit, Macron was able to play football with some of the African leaders and children, symbolically. But when you look at that symbolic representation, what is the strategic motive? You see that Africans now and France are going to play on level ground, which they play the field that we are playing. The field is level. That is freedom from neocolonialism and colonialism, in quote. But the issue is, since it's a game of football, and you see that game of football is guided by strategy, the team with the highest strategy and technicalities wins the game. That is what he's trying to tell Africa through that symbolic representation. And that is why from the submission of my colleagues here, you see that Nigeria need to look strategically into their areas of economic strength and use it in bargaining.
But there's also industrial growth and renewable energy and skills transfer, you know, as part of the issues with the Africa, France-Nigeria Business Council. And these are also areas of interest for Nigeria.
You see one thing about skill transfer, no nation will transfer their skill and technology to you. You need to be strategic to understand it. Skill transfer is just a sort of mirage.
So what are you saying in essence?
So you see that, let me give you an example of what China did. You see that in this area of rare earth mineral, China has been able to secure monopoly of the rare earth minerals, over 60 to 70% of it. And that is why you see that President Trump is in China today to negotiate. And you see that these rare earth minerals in the areas of solar panel, wind turbines, aerospace technology, and in the area of electric vehicles. So you see that China has been able to have a monopoly of that. And that is why you see that investors are coming over the world. And what was the strategic move of China to take this scale away from US? You see that since they have strategic monopoly of supply, what they did is that companies outside China will have shortage of this supply. But when you come to China, you have access to these raw materials. And that is why most of the companies from US and Europe has moved to China to avoid sluggish production at their home country. And that is why you see that China is now one of the second largest economy, if not the first economy in the world. So one thing about skill transfer, you must have a sort of resource that you have strategic control that will attract other investors to come. And the process of establishing their companies in your country, the local engineers and other actors can be able to tap that technology.
All right.
And that is what China did.
Well, I don't know if, Victor, you want to pursue this further, because this is very important. If our area of leverage is oil and gas, I mean with France, and we need to attract skills, here in our country. I don't know, how can Nigeria now position herself to be able to do that within this,
But the question, the first question is, French nationals, the expatriates that you most often bring in to the oil sector first, who are those we bring in? If they are the French, then you begin to pursue skill transfer. But I'm not sure that's the case as it is.
No, not at all. Reality is, we're talking about two different things here. See, the investment of France in the oil and gas sector is not a state-owned enterprise. These are private entities that have come in to invest in the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, of course led by the French government, no doubt about that, no question about it. But when we talk about the specific context in which we're speaking here, the investment summits state categorically where the sectors to which this investment will come in. as far as skills transfer is concerned, it's a very tricky terrain. It was Colin Powell who said that science and technology is the most precious resource of the United States, and so therefore you do not expect the United States to transfer its most precious natural resources to you. So what Prof has alluded to is apt, that countries would rather keep their resources, whether in human or mineral, and ensure that they add value to it before they take it out of their country. Incidentally, we are witnessing unfortunately, a situation where there's mass exodus of our own skills in the health sector and other sectors, as you may please. 40% of medical doctors in OECD countries, for example, are from 4 African countries, and Nigeria is top on that list. So we see this happening. Now, to curb that situation, it must be driven from within the domestic environment. We must ensure that we have the hub to accommodate people we churn out of universities, for example. We spend nothing less than 40 to 60,000 euros on subsidy for to train one medical doctor in this country. But this is the situation on the ground. For a country where the World Health Organization has said that there is 1 bed to 10,000 patients, and 1 medical doctor to 5,000 patients. So speaking of skills, what we must do is to ensure that we find a way domestically. Look, it has to start from within. You don't expect France to come into the country, develop your skills for you and leave them with you, or transfer their own skills to you. What we must do is ensure that we begin to harness the resources we have, develop the skills we have, intellectually and resource-wise. And as a matter of fact, the Chinese, which we're talking about here, had to go through a phase of mercantilism to ensure that they kept their resources within, harness these resources and develop them to a significant extent before they began to export. Because where the value for money is enhancing that product. Whether it's an individual or a resource, you must enhance it to a significant level before you begin to contemplate export. And these are some of the things we need to begin to look at. So where resources come in, where investments come in, we must ensure we channel these resources to, those sectors that will aid us in harnessing our own resources, whether they be mineral or to add value to them, and then we can begin to export this value addition. This is exactly where the conversation should be.
And this is the strength that Kenya has
absolutely.
over Nigeria.
Yes, in the area of fintech, for example.
Yes. Now, away from that, one more concern of African leaders, of course, they are calling for a new global financing order, which has been called, there are many other countries that are interested in this. And I'm asking Dr. Akishiju, how realistic is this?
It's very possible, but please let me just also add something to what Prof's submission on skill transfer. No country would deliberately transfer skill to another jurisdiction. It's supposed to be the specific advantage, a comparative advantage of each, with jurisdiction, as it were. But I think this idea, these are concerned over outflow of educated career professionals and all that into especially developed countries. I think it's an advantage for us. On the peripheral economy, as it were, I also believe that there's going to be a return, of this...
in terms of repatriation.
Repatriation and all that. So we are not just going to repatriate finance funds. They are also going to repatriate skill. As of today, we have about 10 very specialized hospitals in Nigeria. Hospitals that can stand with John Hopkins and all that in terms of comparison. And they are established and managed by Nigerian diaspora, those who had actually retired back home. So I think there should be a deliberate policy, of export, of intellectual export and professional export, as it were. And I think China, at a point in time, actually had that deliberate policy of moving their people out of their own jurisdiction into other world. And of course, till today, there's this suspicion of the average Chinese person in America being a spy, either a corporate spy or business spy or something, because the second task before such individual is to be able to understand whatever, and of course also internalize whatever the skill he had gone to engage with outside the jurisdiction. Then talking about financings, again, the financial world is also a world of comparative advantage. It's business. Nobody is going to give you money just because it likes your face. Money is supposed to be a function, and it's supposed to be a function of certain factors, one of which is what is the possible return on investment for that money. And of course, how reliable are you, in terms of your capacity and capability of paying back? And that's the first primary, orientation for funding. So I appreciate our own President Tinubu's advocacy around that, the conditionalities. And of course, we know at a point in time, the IMF conditionalities, which underscore whatever the basis of debts, of loan to countries, also come with these conditionalities that we call draconian and all that. To a large extent, it has been mitigated, but still, we still have a lot of conditions that deliberately modify whatever economic activities is going on from the targeted jurisdiction. So yes, there is a need for this mitigation. There is a need to start lowering expectations, and of course, there's also a need to start. How do I want to put it now? To start reconsidering this one-size-fits-all conditionalities, as it were. And I think those are some of the things the president is saying. But again, it is also important that each jurisdictions in the African continent, being the emerging economy as they call us, to also start self-reforming. And I think that is why the Nigerian government can also get into the world space and say, we have started reforming. And the first basis of that reforming is to also look at the use of government revenue. Are you applying government revenue the best possible way you should apply? For instance, the subsidy program. Benefits. It has been one of the concerns of all global financial institutions. Then two, if I bring in my money, would I take it out at will? That's another major source of reform that the world look at, because what activates and sustains businesses is the free entry and the free exit philosophy. So if those philosophies are not properly put in place, it also constrains businesses and economy. So those are the things the financial institutions will look at. And of course,
just before we take our break, Professor he talked about reforms. I'd like to quickly, are we reforming strategically? Because what other countries have going for them is in the area of operational or logistics efficiency, policy predictability, and of course, cost reduction and all that. How do we, address these concerns such that, our reforms, it's not just signing paper, MOUs, making promises, but that these promises and MOUs actually translate to tangible or visible outcomes?
I think I would like to emphasize, you see one thing about international economic relations and the issue of making wealth in the international system. It is based on one principle. That principle is that one nation must lose for another nation to gain. And that is the principle of wealth. And when you look at reforms in the international system, there are two kinds of reforms. Reforms that are externally imposed and reforms that are internally generated. And if reforms that are externally imposed is being implemented in a country, what it means that that country will lose for the nations that design such reforms to gain. And now let us look at reforms in Africa and Nigeria generally. Removal of subsidy. Let me use the word subsidy. You see that nations do not subject their energy sources to forces of demand and supply. Look at China. They have a mix of their energy. They still use coal. But you see that when you subject your energy to the forces of demand and supply, you subject your currency to the forces of demand and supply, you see that what you are going to generate is a reform that may not actually meet the strategic objective. For instance, we remove subsidy in Nigeria. Today, Nigerians are buying fuel at the cost of 1,370 or 1,350. Some may say it's because of Iranian war. But this is because of Iranian war, that is strategy that I've used to caution it. Now, when you look at that, and you also look at your currency, 1 naira is exchanging for over $1,300 something. And when you look at that, investors look at one, repatriation of their wealth. When you generate millions of naira in Nigeria and you want to repatriate it to your respective country in Europe, where the investors come from, how much would that mean to their own economy? And now you look at the cost of energy. It's very expensive, which means that your cost of production will be high, and you cannot compete favorably with other companies from Africa.
So what does this translate for our efforts?
So what Nigeria need to do is that reform is dynamic and not fixed. When you look at a reform, you give it a timeline. And within this specific timeline, if it is not meeting the strategic outcome, you need to go back again to the drawing board and review that reform. And see that, and ensure that it is designed to generate the best benefit. Like, for instance, the issue of subsidy. You see that the essence is to make Nigeria economy competitive. But now, is it actually competitive? And that is why you see that in international diplomatic relations, nations always look for investment where they can have comparative advantage.
Okay, we'll pause you
and that is one of the key issues that we need to look at.
We'll pause you at this moment, Prof. Thank you for breaking it down. And I know Dr. Akinji will want to probably weigh in on what you have said. But please, let's take a break. Don't forget that you can always join us on YouTube at NTA News 24 Hub. Too. And of course, follow us on Facebook at NTA News 24 Hub, or send us your WhatsApp messages, and we will take them when we come back from this break. All right, welcome back to the program. It's Good Morning Nigeria. Victor, I know we have some messages. If you have, let me quickly take the few I have here. And this is from Omoba Adeni. It says, Africa-France summit, very robust indeed. But his thought, Africa should wake up from slumber, be independent in terms of local production, and should, so that Africa is not tagged as dumping ground. He says, we should look inwards, make use of our resources from extraction to finishing products to enhance our economy. And Chris Simeon says, Africa-France summit is a welcome development, but hopes and believes that the summit will address issues like security threats. And of course, he says, no investment can thrive in a society that is bedeviled with security challenges. I think I just have one last one. This is from Gerko Karu's site here in Abuja. And he says, Africa-France summit is good move by African leaders. His prayer is that the collaboration will yield good results and not the other way around. Two, he's wondering why, I guess he meant Kenya, is chosen for the summit. All right, Victor.
All right, I have a couple myself, and I'll begin with this one from Ahmed Babadikwa from Maiduguri. As much as I want to appreciate these partnerships, I'm handicapped by deep trust issues. These are the same narratives we've seen headline in the past, and we are still left ravaged by insecurity, with the signatures of these very partners attached to the very deals that failed us. It is time we honestly review these arrangements, he writes, and where necessary, break away to seek better relationships, ones that truly respect our commonwealth. We need to move from being aid dependent to investment ready. Thank you. And from Mohammed Isa in Kotunkarfe, Kogi State. With growing discussions around Africa-France Summit and Africa's economic future, what practical steps can African leaders take to ensure foreign partnerships truly benefit local industries, create jobs for young people, and reduce dependency rather than deepen it. And from Green Campus, I'm not sure that's a name. Well, good morning, NTA. God bless this program. My question is, knowing that no country can deliberately transfer its skills to another country, why don't we engage our youths to study in the best syllabus that the developed countries uses in our own tertiary institutions? After a while, we will become better. Do you agree, Dr. Akeshiju?
It's part of it, but you still need exposure. You need industrial exposure. So it's not just enough for you to have the best syllabus, and that is why you have people go do IT, you know. So it's just one phase of education. You still need a practical phase of education too.
Okay, I'd just like to take off from where Professor Enwere, stopped. He said reforms ought or should, be dynamic in relation with, the current realities. Again, he talked about the issue of subsidy. If you reform and, your reforms are not addressing, realities, I mean, you should go back, to the drawing table and review. So, within the context of our conversation,
I think you use the word context because, some of these concepts are relative. It depends on the environment. It also depends, of course, on the on situation, as it were. For me, I think the removal of subsidy is appropriate, especially when you consider the fact that as at the time it was removed, we were actually borrowing money to sustain it. So when you borrow money, and you are not just borrowing locally, you are borrowing from foreign financial institutions, and it does mean that if anything happens to the structure of the economy here, it doubles what you had borrowed in terms of your domestic currency, and that is why we even have the kind of jump in the portfolio of our debt. We have not added so much to the about $35 billion, that was secured internationally from foreign investors. I mean, from foreign financial institutions. I think as at 2023 or 2024. But because, of course, of the depreciation of the naira, the volume of the naira is now more, than what it was negotiated for when we made those borrowings.
Yes, but the key point he made is that, is it addressing the issues? Are those issues for which that policy was made or that reform was made? Are they addressing the issues?
The first objective was to save money and rechannel that money into infrastructure development.
Are we seeing the infrastructure development?
Yes, because now we are seeing projects that are being funded, and it is not as if the money saved is even enough, for the infrastructure we need. The World Bank had told us that we need $3 trillion to spend $3 trillion, over a 30-year period.
Isn't this part of the external, push?
No, it's not external. In our own case, and that was why I said the president, could boast that we are self-reforming. It is within the context of our own economic space and culture, that we commenced that reform. And now we can say that compared to what other tiers of government, were taking back, there's a quantum leap, which means that they could also provide, more for their people at that tier, at the state level, at the local government level. If they are doing that or they are not doing it, I don't have the data. But on the face value, the data suggests that there's more money going, to those people. And that also on the face value, there's more money that will go into infrastructure development and growth, which is our border. You started off this program on concern of electricity. So, and if you are talking about investment, either domestic or foreign, the basis of that development will be enough electricity, and you need more money, to provide the electricity, either at the level of transmission or even at the level of generation. So, for me, I think the important thing at this level is to try our best to work and manage with the open market economy, as it were, because the controlled economy that we had experienced up till recently had not benefited us.
Okay, let's Prof, weigh in before Victor brings his question. Within the context of our conversation, should reforms be dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. Reforms are meant to be dynamic. Reforms are meant to achieve certain goals. The essence of a reform is to ensure that within a period of time, you're able to actualize set objectives. That's the essence of a reform. And where you find that reforms do not or have not met those expectations, the natural thing is to return back. And that's why they're called reforms, because they're meant to be reviewed, they're meant periodically, they're meant to be looked at again, they're meant to be, measured, by what objectives you set out to achieve in the context in which you're speaking on subsidy removal. Reality is, yes, of course, when you look at the removal of a subsidy vis-a-vis the reality of Nigerians today on the ground, it hasn't translated into anything meaningful. That's just the bottom line. And there's the need for a reform. Whether or not state government and local governments are taking more money back home, I don't think that essentially answers the question of the rationale behind the removal of the subsidy in the first place. Well, again, that is a subjective area, because what is the level of infrastructural development we're witnessing today? In what aspect are
what has been saved?
Absolutely, I was going to go there. In what aspect are we witnessing that vis-a-vis what has been saved? These are some of the things that we must give consideration into. And then, of course, you see, reforms are meant to benefit the lives of the people. And this is what trickle-down economics is about. Ensuring that the people at the baseline feel the impact of governance. Everything should be about the people in the first place. And so where reforms begin to bite hard on the ordinary citizens, why do you proceed with these reforms? In the face of, emerging and contending global issues, we must also look at the dynamics as well. The war currently going on between the United States and Iran, and so on and so forth, and other issues in between. But by and large, reforms are meant to be reviewed where they don't function.
All right, thank you, Prof. Let me get back to Professor Nwerem as we gradually wind up this conversation. Do African countries now have better leverage to negotiate with France, with other world powers, than they did, say, 10 years ago?
I think one thing we should always understand, because when you look at that African Forward Summit, they use the word forward, that Africa should no more think about colonialism and neocolonialism. But one thing you should always understand is that international negotiation and diplomacy is driven by ideology. And what is the ideology of France? So many people misunderstood what colonialism is all about. When you talk about colonialism, you are talking about, one, strategic control of international capital by controlling the political system of nations. And when you talk about neocolonialism, neocolonialism is all about control of world capital by the control of economy through institutions. So you see that when we look at it, we thought that it's a negative perspective, but it's a strategy in international economic relations. And the Western power uses this strategy. But for us in Africa, we see it as a coercive measure. It's not. It's an element of international capitalism. So in our engagement with foreign countries, particularly from the West, we need to interrogate their ideology vis-a-vis our strategic national interest. And that is why, if we are going to negotiate with the West, first of all, we need to identify our environmental challenges in the area of economic and political challenges, and develop a sort of interest or national interest collectively for Africa. The greatest problem of Africa today is industrialization. And what Africa needs to do is that instead of exporting raw materials, which is based on this mutual beneficial framework of this France-African Forward, Africa should look at adding value to their raw materials. But it's not going to be easy, because for you to change the international economic structure, you must be able to have strategic thinking and strategic mindset of the leaders. And one other thing I want to emphasize, the management of political system is quite different from the management of economic enterprises. For political system, you manage it based on the rudiments of statecraft to achieve the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. Yeah. You are not there for profit maximization. For political system management. For economic management, you are there for profit maximization. And that is what we in Nigeria and Africa need to understand. What the problem of why Nigeria is crying about the issue of high-level poverty is not because of the fact that we don't have policies or laws, but because of the fact that we try to manage the political system the way we manage an economic enterprise.
So which should we give priority now?
We give priority to the issue of achieving the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, which is one of the yes, which is political system management, and which is based on statecraft.
Okay, I was just going through some of the reforms that this present administration is taking, of course, to position the country to leverage global investment opportunities. Of course we know of the tax reforms, we know of the tariff restructuring, infrastructure financing, which Dr. Ni, energy transition, digital economy, and of course diversification, from non-oil sector. But beyond this, what more can Nigeria do, to be able to, get out or leverage the opportunities and advantages, and outcomes of the summit?
Sometimes when I see these summits and all that, and of course discussions around capital, around resources and all that, I try as much as possible to come and put myself on the outside and look in. What exactly is the size of the Nigerian economy? Recently, it grew to $307 billion. It used when we used to have subsidies and all those things, it used to be $520 billion.
Rebased.
That is a relatively small economy. And when you also look at our budget size annually, we have the largest so far in 2026, less than $50 billion. So what that tells you is that this economy needs a lot of activations from wherever it may come from, because it's not likely that it organically grow itself because of the limitation of funding, as it were. Out of that near 50 billion, it's not exactly 50 billion, out of that near 50 billion, about 23 billion is going to go into infrastructure. How many infrastructure facilities can the $23 billion realize?
But Prof argued also earlier on that it is not as if the finances or the funding is not there, but it is also as because of our own,
is it there?
Well,
no, is it there?
You talked about the gains from the subsidy removal.
Yeah.
And
what have we gained? We've gained $10 billion, and we need $100 billion. Have we gained anything? Those are the questions we also need to interrogate. I mean, those are the issues we need to interrogate going forward, and see what are the alternatives do we have to grow our economy into a truly robust economy. And that we start, of course, jettisoning this idea of Nigeria being a hugely wealthy economy. And because the reality is that it is not a hugely wealthy economy.
All right, Dr. Agishiju, I think we've run out of time. I don't know if it will be asking too much of a professor to say, take 30 seconds for your closing remarks. And I'm wondering, what role should Nigeria play going forward, in shaping Africa's foreign policy direction?
Yeah, Nigeria has a great deal of influence to make as far as shaping Africa's foreign policy direction is concerned, because obviously Nigeria is the largest, the most populous black country in the world. And when we speak, we don't just speak for Africa, we speak for the black race. And so I think we have that edge amidst other advantages, strategic advantages, which we also possess as well. But beyond all of this, I think we need to begin to deepen the South-South cooperation, which is often talked about. We need to ensure that we look around and invest amongst ourselves much more than we are doing at the moment.
I guess we'll have to leave the conversation here. It's something that probably will go on and on, but let me thank Mukhtar Imam, Professor of International Relations and Diplomacy, who is also a directing staff at the National Institute for Security Studies. We appreciate your time and your thoughts on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let me also thank Dr. Niyi Akinshiju, Chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiatives, who is also Finance and Investment Analyst. Thank you for coming on Good Morning Nigeria, as always. And finally, but by no means the least, Professor Chigozie Enwere, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies. Thank you very much, Prof, for your contributions to the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that has been Good Morning Nigeria for this Thursday. Tomorrow is another day. I'll be here. I don't know where Claire will be, but enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow.
Anyway, you can watch a repeat of this program later today at 5 p.m. But you can also follow us on YouTube at NTA News 24 Hub 2 or Facebook at NTA News 24 Hub. I am Claire Dilabu Abdurrasaq. Bye-bye for now.